Alright, our first video here for the powder metal processing processes is really about traditional ceramics processing. So even though usually we think of traditional ceramics as being made out of clay, I want you to think of them in these categories. I want you to think of clay as really just made of powder. Really, after clay dries out, you can crumble it, it's basically back to powder. So just think of clay as powder, but that there's some added water and maybe a little plastic or plasticizer added in to make it kind of formable, but really it's clay powder. It's a ceramic powder that you start with. Okay? So that kind of forms the basis, and if you think of it that way, all the processing of clay really is like powder processing. It's not a metal, it's a ceramic, but powder metal gets processed the same way. Okay? So we'll go to the notes here. After we've got basically the clay and it's mixed and ready for processing, there's kind of a few different ways to do it, but the basics all go through the same. We shape it, dry it, and then cook it or sinter it. And kind of depends, the shaping process here depends on how much water and additives there are in it. So for example, one of the easiest way to shape something out of a traditional ceramic is slip casting. There's a nice video link in YouTube that you can find on slip casting, but really the idea is just that you pour in the clay or the plaster. Really it's just a watery version of clay. Extra water added in so it basically pours like a liquid. So pour it into a plaster mold or any other kind of a mold. Pour that watery clay in, drain it out, and then remove the mold. And that's it. The cast, the slip actually hardens and creates a shell inside the mold, and you pour the rest out, but when you remove the mold, you've got basically a shell, and that would be the casting itself. So as I said, check out the YouTube video on slip casting. So that's a real watery mixture. If it's not so watery and it's more formable like clay itself, when we think of like Play-Doh or something, then really it's just a forming process. So that's really, we haven't really covered forging yet, but it really is forging of clay. And this is what toddlers all over the world do with Play-Doh. And I actually did put another little video clip on clay forming as well. And then the third is kind of the other extreme, where it's pretty dry and the clay mixture really is more like a powder. Slip casting is a liquid. There's lots of water in it. Forming of clay is kind of in the middle, that it's a solid, but it's very formable. Well, just straight pressing of ceramic would be really more pressing of a powder. So pressing between dies. So we'd pour the ceramic powder into a die and then just kind of press it tight together, but there's usually no water involved, or very little. So in that case, because there's no water, there's no plastic flow, and it doesn't really want to flow in that die to all different cavities, so it's a pretty simple shape usually when we do it that way. So as we said, after the part gets shaped, we've got to dry it. So, well, that just means we're going to let it sit or somehow remove the water. Water would usually evaporate. If there's any other additives, we've got to get those out of there too, like plasticizer or something like that. But we do need to keep in mind that the part may, it probably will, shrink and or warp in this stage. So something might have to be done to account for the shrinkage, or maybe even something to restrain the part and keep it from warping too much during the drying stage. It might crack at that point too. So we got to keep it, maybe the rate of drying, we have to control that so it doesn't crack if it dries too quickly. The last step is sintering. And that's basically just cooking, or in ceramics, sometimes they call it firing. And basically in this step we get a permanent bond that forms. Remember when we started we had powder. Whether it's wet clay or solid clay or just powder itself, it's a powder, so they're all separate materials. But when we fire it, a permanent bond forms between the particles. So it's no longer a powder anymore, it's really one whole solid, where the part with particles all bonded together based on this firing. So this is the basic shape. This traditional ceramic processing, we make pottery this way, porcelain fixtures and such, but it's really the same process we use to make bricks and cement. And just to show you that, I'm going to show a sequence here. This is a Cal Poly student who traveled with me with Engineers Without Borders to northern Thailand. And we worked for a couple of weeks at a factory that makes bricks. And we participated in this, and we did a lot of brick making, so I thought I'd show you because it's basically a traditional ceramics process. So here is Deb, one of the students, weighing out a big carton of dirt, which is basically clay. It's dirt with a little cement, little plasticizer in it, kind of mixed up, but it's kind of a dry clay dirt. And she weighs up an exact amount. And then actually this is Caitlin, who graduated, also a Cal Poly student a couple of years ago, who does most of the rest of the effort here. She's pouring the dirt into the mold. And the mold is basically just a block here. It's got a couple of pins in it where the holes are going to go through the brick. This is the top part of the mold here that'll form the brick, and you'll see. After she pours it in, she has to press it down and kind of keep it a nice even density and fill in as much dirt as possible into the mold. Brings this mechanical arm over just to flip the top of the mold shut, and then you see she actually has to kind of tamp it down. She uses a little leverage here to push down and compress all that powdered dirt into the mold cavity. Brings the lever arm back over, opens up the top, and the brick is basically pressed and ready to pop out. Before she pops it out, she takes a little densitometer. It's basically going to measure the density, and takes it's a little spring-loaded device, and you just measure how far that little device presses into the brick to see how dense the brick is, and as long as it's okay, we go ahead and start popping the brick out. So she's going to pull that lever down and pop it out, but it's not quite as easy as it looks, and so she struggles a little bit. Go, Caitlin. She's got a little coaching from the director of the center. Caitlin, you can do it. Everywhere, all the Thai women here pull these out without any problem. Eventually, Caitlin gives up. Krissa, who's currently a Cal Poly student here, comes over. She's able to pop it out, and everyone's happy. Caitlin goes back to pull that brick out, and it's basically in what you call a green state now. It's all pressed together and packed together, but it's not cooked yet, so it could fall apart, and so she has to very carefully handle it and kind of press with her fingers, just the pads of her fingers, to pick that brick over and set it down in the stack. And then all these bricks will get cooked later on, fired to reach a hard consistency, or the basic brick consistency. All right, so anyways, that's our process, and we'll do some new ceramics next time.